You only take it out when the sun shines in the UK, which isn't that often.
Yeah, once a year.
We don't have that joy, and we are live, folks.
Okay.
And so, love the start of these. And Matt, thank you for joining us from Vegas. You're at Unleash, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Up before the time. I'm up early here to be part of this, and then head over to Unleash right after this.
Yeah, you're starting the day as many people will be finishing
Yes.
in Vegas that maybe aren't there for a conference.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. And yeah, would love to just start off just with some introductions for people that don't know you. And let's kick over to yourself first, Matt.
Sure. Matt Lavery. I work for UPS. I'm a global director of sourcing, hiring, and onboarding. Been with UPS 28 years. Started on paper, brought in an applicant tracking system, heck, in 2003. Seen every alliteration in the TA space since. So I've been around a bit.
Awesome, awesome. And I had the absolute pleasure of meeting you not long ago in Chicago and learning that deep dish pizza is not the best pizza in Chicago. So we had to go out a little bit and have a tavern style in the little squares, and it was unreal. Then finish with a Chicago handshake. Google that, folks, if you've not seen it before.
Yeah, you cannot not explain
Oh, Matt, you explain it because you do a better job.
Sure. Chicago handshake, it's this liqueur that you would never have heard of if I tell you the name, and a chaser of old style. So basically, that's a Chicago handshake, and
Okay.
it's a thing. And ironically, we were in this tavern bar, and I was with two English blokes and a friend, Joel Cheeseman from the Chad and Cheese podcast, and they heard some, accents they're not familiar with on the southwest side of Chicago, and they wanted to welcome Sam and his friend to the south side of Chicago and offer them a Chicago handshake. It was kind of a nice situation.
You're honored.
And we were, one, honored, but we were also told that you're not going to enjoy this. But I didn't think it was that bad, but it's certainly not like the shot meter chaser. It's pokey, I think I would describe it as. And let's kick it over to you, Dave. I would love to get an intro.
Yeah. So Dave Owen, my background is entirely in talent acquisition. Most notably, I guess I was global head of talent acquisition at Dyson. Had 5 years there, as many jobs. And these days I am operating as a TA and workforce strategy consultant, which means I get to spend more time than I would care to admit thinking deeply about talent acquisition and where it's all going, but ultimately helping companies through change moments at the intersection of TA and workforce. And I've done bits and bobs with the BBC and a couple of other things as well along that journey.
Yeah, awesome. And I really wanted to bring together the two minds on this conversation today, looking at both sides of the market. And we spent a lot of time talking on this podcast. There's a lot of commentary around this split in terms of roles, the incredibly high volumes of applications that people are getting for high volume, high supply positions, and then the increasing noise for high demand, low supply positions, and really how we're thinking about the process, how we're leveraging automation, AI technology along that journey on both sides, kind of practically applying it and thinking in a really, I suppose, considered way about where to include technology and where it's relevant, whilst balancing some of those kind of TA hygiene factors that we've thought about a lot. And Matt, I'm going to start on high volume, high supply. You shared a wonderful story the first time I met with you with some incredible numbers. So I'm going to kind of kick it over to you first, look at that high volume, high supply side of the marketplace and leveraging tech along that journey.
Tech and AI is really important when you're talking about the volume of hires that we're talking about. At UPS during our peak season, we're going to hire about 150,000 people in 6 weeks. And that's across about 1,200 buildings across the country. So it's not a small feat. And really what AI has enabled us to do is scale, to do things at a high volume without having to put a lot more headcount into the situation. It's much less about search and skill matching and just making everything scale and be efficient and be relevant to the candidate. So we're talking about scheduling, screening, and onboarding is really that everything that it does is help that person move forward in the process. And really we're streamlined. In our process that we have found today, a candidate's going to get to a job offer in 5 to 7 minutes and be fully onboarded with their I-9. I-9's a US thing, or W-4, emergency contact, all the information that needs to go to the HCM to be hired will be done in about 25 to 27 minutes. So then the only thing we're waiting for is for their first day of work, which could be the next day, maybe a week later, depends on when the next opportunity is for the particular job they applied to and the location. So it's really about scale, speed, and efficiency is really what AI does for us and high volume hourly.
Yeah, incredible and like unreal numbers when we think about
Yeah.
time to hire. We're talking about minutes rather than days, weeks, or months here. And like when you were like being intentional with where that process could be, it feels like almost all of that process is now automated for that type of role.
The happy path is completely automated. So if you go through it and you don't have any issues or the location's hiring that you want to be at, you're through. It's when, for whatever reason, you have an issue with the process. Everyone's not going to do everything the way that, it's not, I think it's fairly intuitive, but it may not be intuitive for 100% of the population. It never is. Then we have, people, we have tutorials, we have, other pieces of area that can go ask for help and move them forward. But for the vast majority of candidates, we do surveys, and when our surveys come back, 90% plus tell us it was fast, it was easy, it was quick. So we're happy with the performance, but we're always constructively dissatisfied, because one of the things we're doing outside of, as soon as peak season's over, we start to go, okay, what went right, what went wrong, and we're going in and making sure anything that went wrong, we're doubling down and trying to fix it, even if it's little things, just to make it better and more efficient. That's kind of where we're at.
Do you mind if I ask you a quick question, sir?
Yeah, go for it.
Along that happy path, when a candidate has an issue, and there are tutorials and FAQs and various sort of wraparound support layers, is there a couple steps out of that a team of people that they
Yes.
can talk to should they wish
Yes.
to? And the second part of this question is, do you just see that the NPS, the candidate experience, is generally well received and positive given the speed and everything else that's part of that?
That's why I said the 90%. That's the NPS score. It's 90%.
Okay.
So it's. I think the candidates are like the process. Now we've also had candidates that didn't like the work when they started the job. They said the process was real easy, but I didn't like the job. It's a tough job. We have videos that we display during this that really show how tough a job it is. So we're not candy coating it. This is what it is. But the thing about it is, if you go back to the olden days, we had somebody come in for an interview, fill out a full 3-page application. At that time, it was 22 pieces of different paperwork we had to get to somebody to get them into the HCM system. And then they came back in for another day where they came in and did their processing paperwork and they started. When you factor in travel and everything else, they were committing 3 to 4 hours of their time to get to their first day of work. And we cut that down, to 26 minutes. We're being thoughtful of the candidates' time, their effort to with us, but we're also at the same time, we're trying to give them a realistic opportunity or vision of what the job is, and without taking all their time. And I think the candidates respect that. I think we hear candidates want speed and transparency. We're transparent to the whole process with them, and we're quick, so they know, straight away, do they have a job offer or not, essentially. In most cases, the people that don't receive job offers just opt out of the process on their own, either by watching a video or just stop moving forward with, what have you. So it's more self-opt out than it is us opting them out.
Yeah, and I think it really speaks to the expectations on a candidate's experience. I really do feel that in different types of roles, we should set different barometers of what's
100%.
relevant.
I mean, our roles are entry level, and it's not the skill sets as much as what we like to call stick-to-itiveness of somebody that wants to be there to do that job. And really, the hourly workspace, they're more concerned about how much am I getting paid, how close is it to where I live, and does the schedule work for me with whatever else that I have going on in my life.
Yeah.
The other questions when you get into professional roles, they're a lot more deeper than that, and it's a different fit. A lot of people don't view our job, and when they come to our company, that's my career. It's a job, and this is what I'm going to make money for right now. Maybe, and it turns into a career. I came that UPS 29 years ago, and I'm still here. But it's the situation is what it is, and you have to understand what your job is, and also develop your process for what your job is. Don't over or under analyze it or engineer it, if you will. If it is what it is, live with it and accept it and move on. Don't try to over engineer it if you don't have to.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful segue as well. When we're thinking about that kind of signal to noise ratio, signal to noise from the candidate side, you want that speed, you want that efficiency, you want to be able to create a great seamless experience to get them from point A to point B. And then when you're thinking about those more like high demand, low supply, potentially incredibly technical positions. It's like, how do we then adopt and change that process? And I know, Dave, from working with you directly on some kind of projects, there's been a lot of focus on that, but also your time, outside of that, anything from kind of hair technicians across. So yeah, I would love to know about like how we're thinking about some of those niche positions, leveraging technology, but perhaps in a different way.
Yeah, I should say like the majority of my background has been at, as I mentioned, organizations like Dyson, where, as you say, it's hair scientists, material scientists, machine learning engineers, a long time ago. So, not just niche, but hyper niche. And I think it's fair to say that AI is not having the same impact in that space as it is in high volume. If anything, it's making it harder because we have candidates that are now rightly AI enabled, but we're still working with a 2-page CV, and the companies are adopting AI at a pace that is reasonable given the inherited risks. So we've got this this CV that is becoming more standardized and harder to interrogate, and companies aren't yet equipped with the right way of dissecting that. So I think what we are seeing is channels are massively taking advantage of AI. Agencies, sourcing platforms, pre-vetted kind of talent communities, they're able to deploy AI into the way that they work, and they end up with this amazing pool of pre-qualified hyper-technical talent, and they can do behavioral and all the things that sit around those core skills. What we haven't yet seen is an in-house version of that can take into consideration style and cultural fit and deep dive into specific projects that would require far more than that 2-page document. So we're definitely not there yet. And I think for the most part, it's harder to do hyper niche hiring at the moment because of that trend.
A lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and Cam and Matt, because obviously you've got some highly specialized roles as well. I'd love to get your take.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to use we've been using AI for a long time in the hourly space. On the professional side of our areas, where we hire pharmacists for our healthcare side, we're hiring pilots, we're hiring sales folks. So it's a pretty eclectic group, but not to the niche that Dave is talking about. We haven't done a whole lot of AI in that space. We're starting to get our toes in the water a bit. And part of the stumbling block that we're finding is getting the match on the job to the skills what the candidate has, and it's trying to extract those and make those match. Because the one thing about AI is that the data that you're presenting isn't solid. It's everything else downstream isn't going to work. Everything in AI is about the data. So getting the job description right and the skills associated with that job description right to the hiring manager's needs is ultra important. If they're off by little, then all the screening, all the matching up front is all wrong. So all the people you're presenting to the hiring manager are going to be wrong. So that's one of the things that I think we have to think about, because I don't know, I sit on all these different calls, different vendors and all these different pieces. And I'm not going to name the company, but we had a presentation last week with a fairly reputable company, and they were talking about, we know your job descriptions are crap, and what we're going to do is take your crappy job description and pull out other job descriptions that are across the industries and contextualize them. And I just thought about that for a minute. I go, so you're going to take my crappy job description and you're going to augment it from companies that aren't mine, who probably have a different culture, maybe a different need. And then we're going to use that to go try and match everything else and hope everything else works downstream. It just kind of made my head explode. I kind of went to this isn't Jurassic Park where you're going to take frog DNA and place it in the place where the DNA doesn't work. It's you gotta have a solid set of AI data. I mean, because when I think about AI in the future and now and in the future, getting your taxonomy on just not on the your job description and the levels of everything, but the skills and the tasks, trying to get situated that going to the hiring manager, what tasks does this person need to do? And then taking the tasks out of it. These are the skills that person needs to have in order to do those tasks. Because often when you go, we can go to a laundry list of skills. It's kind of like in America, like our cereal aisle in America, when you go to a grocery store, there's 500 different brands of cereal in the aisle. So, I want that one, I want that one, I want that one. Little kid, they want to put 10 different kinds of cereal in the cart. And that's what the hiring managers are like. They just, I like that skill. And they're not really thinking about it in a way, is it really relevant to this job? It sounds great, but is it really relevant? And that's where you got to drill this down and make sure, or the matches aren't going to work later on. Everything else that you build upon, everything's from that starting point, that building block.
Yeah, and I think AI, automation, technology, all of that aside, the core tenets of recruitment remain exactly the same, which is, can you gather a really accurate representation of what the business needs in that initial briefing and ongoing work? And then can you relay that back to a candidate in a really clear way and measure against that in a really clear way?
It hasn't changed in 29 years of me doing this.
And I think the kind of piece, there's so much of the technology now, particularly sitting on the post attraction phase, is centered around matching against a job description. And we know job descriptions are inherently inaccurate because even if they are a true reflection, there's often nuance that's missing that can't be captured in keyword proximity. And I think, it's a wonderful call out in terms of that.
There's a really good reason we run long job briefing meetings, and most teams won't work a niche role unless that meeting takes place. And it's because you know that you will fail if you take a 2-page JD and run at the market with it. And also, Matt, your point around that kind of augmenting your JDs with market JDs is a perfect one of many, I'm sure, examples of this. As we get accustomed with the idea that if we can feed more data into a hiring process, then it correlates with positive outcomes. I think there's going to be this calibration that needs to take place that is not the case. And it's far more about what data, whose data, than it is just the sheer amount of data. But we are definitely on the journey of recruitment, generally accepting that if we could get more data, it would be helpful. But that's probably going to come from the same places it's always come from. Job briefing meetings dependent on company culture and assessments.
There's some things you can't get. There's just some things you can't get around, and you can't yada pass. You have to go do that work in order for it to work. And you can do things faster if you do it right. But I think a lot of companies and a lot of vendors, they're trying to get adoption quicker. So they know one of the barriers is having a solid set of job descriptions with skills attached to it so they can go match. So they're trying to bridge that. I don't think they're doing anything nefarious. They're just trying to get their product adopted. But I think that the company has to sit back and say, wait a minute, are these the skills that we really need for this job? And is the hiring manager signed off on it? Because if they haven't, that first set of candidates you send them probably won't be really good, or you're going to have to recalibrate anyway. So it's one of those situations where you have to think about AI is about data, the quality of the data, and it's going to impact everything else downstream. And you can't skimp on it, and you can't just rush past it. You got to do some time and put the effort in, because if you do it right the first time, you can keep repeating it in many cases or augmenting it slightly. The work has to happen somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that point on like the contextualizing and trying to bring a job description using external data and the kind of shortcomings of that, it's the same shortcomings you see of candidates generating CVs in order to gain an interview, right? It's increasing standardization, things are looking more and more similar. And if your job descriptions are just looking more and more similar, and then you get to a space where everybody adopts that process, well, then they're all contextualizing off the context of the context, and they're just building layers upon layers of the same. And I think, often we're looking for that kind of artisanal effect when we're searching.
One of the things that we're noticing now, when you see either people put in a preamble to the CV or resume or a cover letter, in that preamble or the cover letter, it's a regurgitation of what the job description is or the skills are, and then or experience. And in many ways, when you go through the CV or resume, wait a minute, I thought this person said X, Y, and Z. I see A, B, and C. I don't see X, Y, and Z. They're training themselves on how to get past the initial screen, if you will. And then when you get into the interview or the person looking at it, it doesn't meet what the standard is.
Yeah. I keep talking about the immortal 2-page CV. But for me, this kind of trend that we're on, the AI enabled candidate and the non-AI enabled in-house TA team, let's say, or at least not comparable, is what's going to force a change, I think, to the underlying kind of architecture of things. Because the only way to get around that is to move towards a tech-led, human-owned hiring process. So my hot take at the moment is that the AI-enabled candidate, what's causing immense pain across TA teams, is actually the one thing the industry needs, because that high pain is going to create a high change impetus, and that will be the final push we need to start questioning why have we throttled data for the 3 decades for the sake of a recruiter's bandwidth. Yeah, it's really exciting. The question is like, how long do we sit in this kind of messy middle period?
I understand it. I think I agree with it. I think it's going to be an interesting take on how the different co-pilots deal with this data, and they're going to deal with it differently, I feel. Because with all the data intake that they're taking, they're not only getting impulses from the company and what they're doing, they're getting impulses from the candidate. So they understand the candidates carpet bombing companies with 1,000 resumes, and they're all different, right? And they understand that. And they get the companies, I'm sending up thousands of candidates and only a handful are getting screened or selected, and the rest, are kind of, in the ether. And I think what's going to have to happen is a meeting in the middle of somewhere where you're talking about a process and a system where candidates have to qualify themselves somehow within this. And it's kind of, in America, we have baseball cards and you have like your stats on the back of like, how many hits you had and different things. I think companies and candidates, AI is going to come up with technology that tells everybody the transparency about it. These are their stats.
Yeah.
On either side of the situation. And you might come to a situation on, is this a real serious candidate, or is this a candidate who no-shows on their first day like 80% of the time? Or is this, a company that makes job offers, doesn't follow through, or whatever the case is? And I think there is going to be a revolution, but I think in a good way. It's going to force companies to be more transparent. It's going to force candidates to be more intentional on what they want to apply to. And I think at the same time, it's going to be a better outcome, I hope, because I think that's the idea, is trying to get people to the right fit as quick as we can. And I don't know how fast we get there, though, because it's who's going to be that independent body that when you got GDPR and you have the laws in New York and California, there's a lot against that to try to do something like that. But maybe it's a company that can do it I don't know, but it's
the point of the pain is causing the impetus to change is so crucial here, because that kind of baseball card example that you talked to is kind of like, from our side, we very rarely talk about hackajob when we're on these, but it's when you've got a marketplace and when you've got one profile that's similar to LinkedIn, it's much more of an objective view of that candidate rather than many different versions. And I think we're going to see companies increasingly moving towards levels of verification and having that impetus to do so, because you are going to need that transparency, and the transparency is going to be expected on the other side as well. Like, what does this process look like? What am I going to be going through? What's going to be asked of me, and what do I get out of the other end?
For candidates, if you're not using paid transparency or giving them ranges, that's a problem. The other one is, who am I going to work for? Is the person that's going to interview me the person I'm working for? Because there's often, you might be interviewing with 2 or 3 levels up, and you're going to work for someone else when you get there, and it's a letdown from that situation in many cases. So I think that kind of transparency is going to be important as well. I'm sorry, Dave, I cut you off.
Oh, no, totally fine. I was going to say that it's consistently kind of staggers me that we are all so sure that such a colossal change is coming around the corner, but we just don't know what it's going to look like or how big the corner is, to the point where you could say we're going to have a rethinking of the CV, and we're going to have a verifiable digital portfolio that is a far more comprehensive reflection of a candidate. Cool. I mean, like, that sounds really cool, but it is a really hard thing to imagine. Like you say, where does liquidity start on the use of that? I also spend time thinking about systems such as, what about if when you apply to a job, an AI system in the back end can make an assessment of you and can come up with an assessment result that it would expect from somebody that says what you just said. And if you underperform versus your own benchmark, you don't go through. So there's like this handicap system of like, maybe there's a way of self-regulating this by encouraging candidates to set the bar reasonably or even low. But then you get new challenges.
I was thinking about this the other day, and I know there's companies out there that do this today, almost a blockchain kind of situation, where you put your information in there and I can validate, this is me, this is my picture, this is where I live, this is what company, the employers I had in the past, and different things. I think the next thing might be where a lot of these assessment companies that are out there, they become part of that process. So I can just take these assessments and it becomes part of my blockchain when I go apply. So instead of applying to it, you're taking your blockchain information that's been verified, validated, and it's getting pushed into something new that's not built yet.
A great promise.
And that's what kind of thing that I don't know how long that's going to take, but I really feel as though you're going to have to carry around like your blockchain of information with you to go apply at some point, because now I can validate. Not only does that do for your skills and other things, but for compliance reasons, in the world that we live in today, depending on what job you have and where you work, you have to prove where you lived and where you worked over a period of time. Now it's all consolidated in there, and it's easy and transparent to turn over to the government for audits and different things as those happen. So I think there's a lot of utility in something like that. But again, it goes back to your data, how much you want to share, and the laws around holding on to it. It's those things are all kind of butting up against each other a little bit in order to make that universal, especially when we're talking about over country borders and different parts.
And so like fraught with challenges. And I also feel that like anything to do with assessment of skills, you've also got to validate, well, which assessment provider is the relevant one and how valid is that test? Plus you've got the commercial models of test publishers, which are generally geared around number of completed tests. So it's not in their commercial interest to have one version. There was something brilliant a while ago in learning and development called Tinkan API, which was about carrying this information over from one to the next. Where yes, there was a store of somebody's knowledge, but again, like how valid is the test? There's all of those things around it, and that kind of pass mark. I'm very conscious of time, so we've got a bunch of questions in the chat. I've got one more question for you both, and I think Dave, your terminology captured it really well. In like a tech-led, human-owned process, which on the high volume, high supply, it feels like there's lots of things which are working really smoothly. On the other side, it feels more like a hindrance. And I kind of buy the latter one there, but there's some challenges there which we won't have enough time to go into. What are the metrics that matter when we're thinking about that process? Matt, you kind of kicked us off and you were very quick to highlight that the candidate NPS. What else are we looking at when we're thinking about a human-owned tech-led process? And what are the KPIs that matter? And then we're definitely going to come to Joe's question, Danusha's question in the chat. So,
I can't see the questions, but
Go ahead, Dave. If you want to take it first, I got some thoughts on this too.
I'll keep my answer short because I think there's like an infinitely long question. I think many of the metrics that we've always used will still be the same, but hopefully the unit of measurement is significantly different. So we go from weeks and months to minutes, hours, maybe days. For me, it will be things like interventions. So how many moments do the TA team or the candidate support team, whatever that might be called, jump in and successfully resolve a candidate's challenge? The other metrics will be around NPS, which has never really truly taken off, I feel, in TA. It's kind of there, but it will be of every candidate, whether they are rejected at the first stage and never hear from you, or whether they are the candidate that you hire. So I just think like an entirely different looking school of thought around candidate experience and manager experience. And then it will be based on the new process that the new technology unlocks and the new problems that creates as a result.
No, I completely agree. And I kind of look at it, it's going to go beyond speed and cost. It's going to go into AI usage, fairness, user experience, adoption, and trust. Because as we move forward, it's really going to become really important that the candidate feels and trusts the process and the outcome. And I think all of those things are going to have to play into it. And if you're going to use AI to any level, you have to have bias audits in many different places already. So you have to account for it and you have to measure it. So you should be looking at that on a regular basis to make sure there isn't a bad outcome and be ready to change if there is.
I feel the need to really jump in again and say,
I could see you.
I was like, oh no, I mean, like, there's a couple of like really cool ones. There's one really nerdy one, which is like compute cost per hire. And I know like cost per hire gets a bit of a beating these days, but compute cost per hire is a really cool one to imagine coming in. Like how expensive is your AI process versus the hires you make? But I think Martin Redstone, who I'm a big fan of, it keeps me honest on this topic. And I think there will be another entire school of thought on repeatability of the results of AI assessments. So do the same candidates come out in the 25th percentile, the 50th percentile, the best, if you do it again? I think there'll be this mirror image of what's going on that checks that everything is happening as it should be.
Love that. Okay, we're going to go to questions from the audience because we are running slightly over, but we knew that we would anyway, right? We've got a huge topic and two quick lines. So Joe Carter was the most recent question, super pointed, of like which specific tools are you using right now in the recruitment process? So AI powered tools, and how are they helping streamline tasks, screening, sourcing, interview scheduling? Matt feels like it's more one in your realm from your summary.
Yeah, I mean, we're using Fountain. It's an ATS. I mean, I'll just give you our tech stack today. We have Phenom for our website and our CRM. We have Workday as our HCM, and we have Fountain for our ATS for our high volume hourly. We use the Workday ATS everywhere else, 73 countries. We're only using Fountain right now in the US, but we're probably going to expand it out. And there's AI tools built into the Fountain process that help us predict as well as screen and schedule candidates and communicate to candidates uniquely. So we're building that into the Phenom process as we bring that on board. We're a newer customer to that, so more to learn on us. We know they have 25 agents, and we're going to deploy them where and how we need them to help us with our process.
Yeah. Awesome. And I think just really simple there on that, sourcing, screening, scheduling piece. It's really about that communication with the candidates where it's being leveraged, streamlining that onboarding process. And then, Joe, if you joined a little bit late at the start, kind of 23 minutes time to onboard. But I think, what we were talking about just now is those hygiene factors that still need to be maintained, which is the experience on both sides. And if that's not being maintained, then that's the intervention. How many interventions are you having when you're doing that tech-led process? And then Dave, flip it to the other side.
Yeah, so I feel like answering this question in public there's a risk that it ages as badly as like your Facebook comments did, and you go back and delete because who knows. So I'm going to shout out the people that I think are being really responsible. So I think like hackajob is awesome, and not to pump up your tires, Sam, but that is super common. The other ones that I see a lot are as a company called Pop, who I have the privilege of advising every now and again. They're helping with pre-screening of CVs, but really thinking about how you keep human in the loop as well. I think MetaView is consistently featuring as part of that transcribing of job briefing and coming up with insights and helping out the front end of a process. But I would caveat this, and there are a couple more, but I'll say them. Most companies are inheriting AI. Keep trying to sort of make TA leaders not beat themselves up about this. I think there has been a lot of great companies like the Beameries of the world, been around a while. You trusted them to solve a problem. They have become AI enabled, and you trust them to solve your problems, but with AI. So I think we're in an inheritance stage as opposed to an active adoption stage. And we may see that kind of falter down with the new EU AI Act. And then I think it will truly start to head north, which is really good. And the players that are being ethical, transparent, and fair will be the companies that survive that and win and ultimately get purchased in the future.
I'll throw two companies out there that I've looked at and different levels of consideration. One is called Upwage, another is called Higher Brain. They solve two totally different things, but they're using AI in very different ways, but very effectively. They're both relatively new companies, but those are ones that I would throw out there as well. I'm sorry to...
No, great. And I think, and this is what that call out's for. And I think the most important piece that you touched on there, across is like being considered about where you're applying technology and making sure that the companies that you're working with on the other side are being really considered about the way in which they are leveraging technology and inheriting and placing that into their process. And I think, Matt, on your example, it was like a really pointed example of a very particular set of talent that you wanted to recruit in a certain way that had that challenge. And you've got that speed and the need at that volume, and it's about leveraging the right technology. It doesn't need to be all AI-led. Some of it is just pure automation. Some of it is just nice sequencing that's making the process smooth. And that should be the direction, right?
One thing I know you want to throw the other questions, but I think intentionally, vendors are going to get very good at two things in the future. One is integrating to your tech stack seamlessly. I mean seamlessly, not what they call seamlessly today, because there's very few that integrate seamlessly today. They say it is, but not so much. The other is time to actual utilization. It's you sign with a contract on how fast it can be brought up and running effectively, seamlessly. And some of those, especially when you're talking about clunky ATSs or websites or CRMs, they're months in time and different things. We're going to have to get that down to weeks and days, because the fast as this stuff is happening, everyone, one of the questions I get from leadership in our company is, when is it going to be normal again? And I go, there is going to be no more normal. With how AI is in our space today, you had the pandemic, you had all these different things that you had to move around and change things to survive. I think we're going to be in a constant set of change for probably the next several years. I don't see us just setting something on the shelf and letting it run without constantly improving, tinkering, or looking at it. It just does. Those days are gone. When you bought an ATS and you let it run for 5 years, and then you assessed it when the contract was due, and then you determined it, those days are gone. You have to be in your stuff, in your data stack, and understand how it works, why it's working, where it's not working, and how you can improve it. It's going to be a constant state that way, I feel.
Yeah. I think the final question, and maybe Danusha's got a tool that's coming in this space, and maybe not. But there's been a couple of comments in, and I like the idea. And there was a chap called Kevin Green that used to run the REC, the Recruitment Employment Confederation, a group of recruitment consultancies. And they said for some roles, you may as well just throw a pile of CVs up in the air and pick one at random, and it's going to be as accurate as the process which you're running, because of the volume. And I love that example. And yeah, he gave a great talk on that many years ago. And Danusha suggesting something similar. So imagine a platform where recruiters and job seekers connect instantly via text or video chat, completely randomly. No applications, no algorithms, just conversations. So like, I can't remember what it was called, like chat roulette or
right? The
something.
chat
Yeah,
roulette,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't like this is a rogue one potentially, but I'd love to get thoughts. I think fraught with challenges, I would say, if
Yeah.
candidate volumes are anything to go by. But maybe the
In the
conversation
US,
we've
that's going to be a
had.
little difficult when you have to track who you consider a candidate or not. Because
Yeah.
you have to capture some data and stuff. It's not a bad concept though, but it's when we took out the interview of our process, that was a long pilot that we had to do to prove to our leaders that essentially they weren't improving the selection process by being involved. So it took us a long time and a lot of pilot and a lot of data to show them that, okay, you're spending hundreds, thousands of hours interviewing these people. And when we just rolled people through and we didn't do that, the outcome wasn't any different. It was the exact same.
Yeah.
So do you want to keep spending all that time and all that effort, or do you want to take that time and work in the business and make that better and let us just bring the people on?
We're here for hot takes, right? I've got another pretty large hot take.
Just quickly, so Danusha's actually just said, yeah, candidates get a closure with immediate feedback. And I think there is a great example. The name escapes me. They've just closed a massive round in the US where essentially an AI interviewer takes the interview with every single candidate, provides that instant feedback, and then adds them to a marketplace setup, which that feels like a lot more of an obtainable milestone where you're being asked a series of questions, you're getting that understanding. Obviously, there was a very video player within the space that made assumptions at scale using technology, and faced a pretty serious lawsuit. I think we've got to be incredibly mindful where tech's making that decision. There's certainly it's a grenade to throw in as we still run over on this session, but people are still here with us. Everybody stayed, so let's keep going for a few more. Hot take, Dave, throw us.
We pivoted a little bit to sort of questioning the interview briefly there. My hot take is, before I answer this, we can't know any of this. So we're throwing out casting aspersions and predictions. But if you take what is true today and some basic assumptions about the future and just project them over a sort of a long infinite timeline and think about where it takes you, my hot take is that we will look back on the interview as quite a radical thing. I think human beings are unconsciously biased. We made training to try and remove that, which I think will not age well as well. In the future, with much more data, I totally agree with your point, Sam. I think we will remove that human involvement in the process. There will still be there'll be ownership of all the checks along the way, of course, and there will still be a final connection at the end of that process. But I think we are slowly coming to the realization that we are not a particularly fair machine for making assessments. And the example I gave recently on LinkedIn was we celebrate referrals and we tell hiring managers about referrals, and we still haven't quite come to the realization that that is hugely detrimental to fairness to tell a manager that somebody has been referred, and it's kind of accepted. And I think that's a good signal of where we are and the journey that we need to go on. We're not at that point yet where tech is good enough to do these things. But I do think that when I say tech-led, human-owned, I truly mean we won't be anywhere near the assessment of candidates, but we will own it, or another team will own it in a different looking.
To set it up and to qualify it and to stabilize it. I think the other thing, you talked about fairness is one thing, and that's super important. But the other part is how effective are they being in their selection? Because in the same example Sam gave, if you just threw the CVs in the air and you picked one, how different is that the outcome of that person being successful? Were you going on 8 rounds of interviews and you picked somebody? That's never a guarantee.
Yeah. And I actually, so Dave, you said you agree with me. I think one thing I want to challenge there, though, is I actually think humans are going to be more involved, but the task they're going to do is going to be different. And so on this point on candidate ghosting, right? Let's take Matt's example: 150,000 people in 6 weeks. Wouldn't want to guess how many applications that was in order to generate that outcome. Believable volumes. How can we improve the experience and reduce that ghosting? Or somebody comes into a bottleneck and they're getting a response in 2 minutes because your time's freed up, because you're not doing the onboarding, you're not doing the checks, you're not doing the admin. What you're doing is focusing in on creating a world-class experience where somebody's got a problem and
Yeah.
or responding back to people at pace, giving them real
Yeah.
feedback when they have applied. So I think there's a lot of stuff,
But I think that the history to that, if you look,
touch on that.
think the TA space 15, 20 years ago, sourcers weren't a thing. CR teams weren't a thing. Social media teams weren't a thing. It was end-to-end recruiting. It was one person. I had the rec. I owned it from cradle to grave. Now we've evolved into different segments of branding and messaging. And I think that's going to evolve to what Dave was talking about, is instead of selection interviewing, it's going to be other components of the process on setup and maintenance, and also triage are going to be the areas that they're going to focus on to make sure that we're meeting the need of the candidate.
Go on, Dave.
I do feel the need to say that this sounds like I'm predicting the end of a lot of what we do. As you said, I'm not. I think there are net positive jobs in that future. I think the team of people that are that candidate support team, the candidate experience designers, relationships are going to matter more than ever. As you say, Sam, there's going to be a lot of clicking and a lot of proving that you did make the decision in the system and it didn't just happen without human oversight. So I think that talent engineering, as I call it, has lots of amazing new jobs, lots of amazing new tech.
Titles that
It's not a doomsday.
There's a lot of titles that haven't been even created yet that are going to be here in 5 years that are all going to be tied to the TA space. It's everyone's worried about losing your job. You might lose the title that you have today, but you might have to go get reskilled a little bit and you're going to get a different one because the experience that you have is going to be essential into making all this work in the future.
Yeah. And I think, Matt, you absolutely coined it perfectly. It's like that. We looked at this a few years ago as the RO100, we looked at the setup of TA teams, and it went from TA partners to some organizations having 130 different job titles within talent acquisition, big global ones with centers of excellence. And I was chatting to someone earlier today who's going to be coming on the show in 2 weeks' time, and they just rightly pointed out that every single revolution has created more net new jobs than have been lost. Sometimes the waves when that happens.
The business example is when ATMs first came out, everyone thought tellers would, there would be no more tellers. But after 5 years, there were more tellers because the banks were able to scale and open up more branches because they needed fewer tellers at each individual bank branch. But at the end of the day, you had more tellers than you had when you started the process. And again, I don't know if that's going to be the case, but I don't think it's going to be, okay, you're going to lose 50% of your headcount. I think there's going to be a reduction, but I also think a lot of people are going to get repurposed into other areas of maybe TA. Maybe there's another piece that we haven't really talked about, because I see a synergy of TA and talent management coming together, because the internal and the external process, as we build this out, may become more synergized. And how you fill internal jobs may not look that drastically different than how you do external jobs. The same kind of exercises, the same kind of processes. So those two things could link into a lot more together, so that processes, the things are all tied into one process. And I don't know what the hell you call it, but it's going to be a new name or something, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think in the interest of time, because we have run over, everyone stayed with us. So thank you everyone for staying with us. I think the one thing, so there's one last comment in the chat, which really is a lovely segue to kind of close this out. And it was like, how would you sell the opportunity of the organization to RAG candidates? And I think this is exactly what we were aiming to cover today. And maybe it's not the bifurcation of roles, maybe it's the trifurcation or the septification of roles, but it's essentially different processes for different types of audiences that you're trying to reach. If your candidates want speed and efficiency because they've got choice paralysis of lots of similar roles and they want to make a quick decision and move through a process speedily, and you can maintain that experience, that's probably going to be tech-led. It's probably going to be heavy in automation. It's probably going to have human intervention. For jobs where you're not getting thousands of applications and you're trying to find not just a needle in the haystack, but a top 1% in a really particular area, then you're going to have a heavily human-owned process that's going to be supported by technology. And there's probably lots of instances in between that. And it's about finding that balance and thinking about what those core tenets are. And also then what are those hygiene factors? What are you actually measuring against? What's important? And then critically does it have that organizational impact? Are the people that you're hiring in that way having a great experience and then going on and impacting the organization as you would expect, completing the task, completing the skills? I knew this would be a great conversation. I also knew that we'd overrun. So thanks for bearing with us, everyone who was there, and also sticking with us. Both sides, two fantastic minds. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dave, for joining. Do connect with these guys on LinkedIn. Follow them where they go. Always brilliant thinkers. And thanks for being on the show, folks.
Thank you.
Definitely. Bye.